Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to session 2 this afternoon. In this session we will have 2 innovations, one on irrigation and the second one with respect to animal management. The first speaker in this session is Dr. Mark Else, who is Programme Lead for Research Efficiency in Crop Production at East Malling Research. Mark joined them in 1998 and leads the Resource Efficiency Programme. His research focuses on manipulating the interactions between crops and their environment to deliver better resource use, increase yields and consistency of fresh produce quality. A major focus of Mark's research is developing precision irrigation and fertigation systems for commercial use. His title is Scaling Up Precision Irrigation. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me here this afternoon to talk about some of the research and some of the translational research we're doing at East Malling. I should say the title of my talk is Precision Irrigation. I've been asked to focus on the soft and the tree fruit crops that we specialise in at East Malling, but it's not really about necessarily just saving resources such as water and fertilisers. What we're trying to do is to develop systems that can help to improve marketable yields, produce quality and reduce waste. Okay, so a brief outline of my talk. Can you hear me without the mic? Yes, is that okay? You can hear me? Okay. Brief outline of my talk then is just to talk about an introduction to precision irrigation, and then what are the drivers for change, the sort of measuring tools and techniques that we're using at East Malling, and how the industry view those sort of techniques and that research. What are the opportunities and what are the sort of the commercial barriers that we're overcoming at the moment. A brief overview of some of the technologies that we're helping that are helping us to scale up these technologies, and then just a little bit at the end about how we can improve, how we can use water stress, how we can apply beneficial stress to help improve product quality and yields. I should say here the map here is a map constructed by colleagues or should I say collaborators at Cranfield University, Jerry Knox and colleagues, and it shows the areas in England in this case that are under pressure for water resources. So the orange, the red and the yellow areas in 2008 were those areas where there was already increasing pressure on water supplies for irrigation of horticultural crops. And you can imagine those areas, the pressure in those areas has intensified over the past 6 or 7 years. So what is precision irrigation? Well, precision irrigation in my mind is being able to match demand with supply. It's to put the right amount of water to the right place at the right time. And this is a significant challenge. You can see here the graph, the blue bars. This is a daily water use of a raspberry crop. And you can see there that there's up to 13-fold variation in the volumes of water that are used. And that can be due to many things. It can be due to different stages of plant development. It can be due to different growing environments, sunshine, cloudy days, different evapotranspiration, a whole sorts of different things. And of course the challenge is to develop a system that can respond to and predict those changes in water needs. So perhaps rather than applying irrigation on the right there, what's called so-called insurance irrigation, to make sure that there's never a limiting availability of water, what we want to be able to do is to develop systems that can apply that water more precisely and at the right time. And in order to do that, of course, we need to make sure we have efficient and effective technologies and tools to help growers to recognise when the optimum time to irrigate their crops is. So the drivers for change. Well, in the southeast alone in Kent, the volume of irrigation used for drip, most of these horticultural crops are irrigated using drip systems, and the volumes used for irrigation have doubled in the last 10 years, last 8, 9, 10 years. So they've gone up from 1 million to 2 million cubic metres. And that trend shows no sign of decreasing. And that's partly because of the switch to more intensive systems. You have now intensive orchard systems, intensive substrate strawberry systems, And of course, in those systems where the crop's covered, there's an absolute need for irrigation. So that partly explains that's rise in irrigation water demand. And at the same time, of course, we also have to be aware of the effects of intensive horticulture on water body quality. So you can see the map there is of nitrate vulnerable zones, and a recent statistic is that I think this year only 27% of the UK water bodies met the standards specified under the Water Framework Directive as being of good quality. The deadline to achieve that was 2015, and I believe now that deadline has been extended until 2027. So there's going to be a clear need for growers to use water more efficiently, but also to try to limit the impacts of those production systems on groundwater quality. We've already heard about the requirement for us to double food production, and although we can't feed the world on strawberries and apples, of course, they do form a major part of our diet, and they do contribute towards a healthy diet. And so if we can use techniques to try to improve the phytonutrient content of those fruit, that will also benefit the consumer. So just some of the current sort of methods and systems that are used to try to predict irrigation scheduling at the moment on commercial farms. I didn't put the first one up there. The first one is intuition and experience. Many growers have a water-sensitive finger, and they can tell just by pressing the soil whether that crop needs to be irrigated. And there's a lot of truth in that. You can actually feel whether there's enough moisture in the soil. So although that's non-scientific and not at all involving any technology, that's a very good way to see whether you can, if your crop needs irrigated. Of course, scaling up then, that's no longer possible, and we need to develop other systems relying on other sensors to give us that information. So there's a whole range of different sensors in use. Most of these are perhaps measuring the water content of the substrate or the soil, and you can see there a couple of examples from Delta T. We can also use estimated rates of evapotranspiration, combine those with measures of crop coefficients, so we can work out exactly how much water a plant is losing each hour of each day, and that was the system we used to derive the graph I showed you in an earlier slide. And then we can also use, there are probes now that are coming, they can actually measure the plant response to limited soil water availability. So a lot of the methods are indirect, but there are now direct methods that can measure plant stress responses. So our aim really is to try to understand how plants respond to physiological stress, to abiotic stress, and then use that knowledge to develop precision systems for growers to be able to manage their water and their fertiliser inputs more efficiently on farm. And so we're working, for example, with manufacturers of soil moisture probes, Delta T. We're also working with commercial irrigation rig companies such as Netafim. And the idea of doing that, of course, is to develop a scientific solution that integrates into current commercial systems. It's very important that these systems talk to each other. A lot of complaints amongst the growers are that they might have 4 or 5 different systems and they don't talk to each other. So, of course, they all need to be integrated and provide the grower with the on-farm information that will help them to schedule their water and their fertilisers more efficiently. So all of these systems have telemetry, so we can see what's going what's going on in terms of how much water the plant is using and how much water the plant will need over the next hours or the next days. And of course the aim is either to maintain or perhaps eliminate the amount of water that's lost to the environment. A lot of soft fruit growers are under the impression that we have to irrigate to flood the system. We have to drain. We have to have sufficient drain there to remove the ions that accumulate within the substrate or the soil. And while that is a consideration, it's not necessarily the case. There is great opportunity to reduce the volumes of water being applied without, without creating problems associated with the accumulation of ions in the substrate. And so one way we do this then is to apply controlled stress to plants. You can see the green line there is what we call an irrigation test regime. So irrigation to those plants is being applied automatically. The sensors sense when the substrate dries to a certain point. That system then triggers the irrigation, and by doing so, you can see the little green peaks. That's basically irrigation events over that time period. So by using this method, we can maintain, in this case, the coir moisture content within a very narrow predetermined limit. Of course, what we want to know is how dry is too dry. When do we start to see effects on plant growth, on fruit quality, fruit expansion rates, and so on and so forth? And the way we can do that now is to use the system to provide a very controlled, targeted degree of stress. And we can measure the plant responses to that stress as the coir dries. And you can see the red line there. That's a stepped decrease in root water availability, essentially. And we can measure the plant's responses to those and see at which point we start to affect photosynthesis. We can see when fruit expansion rates begin to fall, and we can see what effect those regimes have on aspects of fruit quality. So, of course, we've done lots of experimental work at East Marling Research, but the key to all of this is to transfer this out to commercial grower sites. And I think many of you will know, if you know any grower sites, there's no grower site that's exactly the same. They all do something slightly different, and so the system has to be flexible and allow us to implement it in different growing systems with different growers in different locations. And so a typical substrate system is here. These plants are grown in bags of coir on a tabletop, and they're often irrigated between 10, 11, 12 times a day, short pulses, to try to maintain or try to reduce the likelihood of there being limiting water. Because as we said before, if there's limiting water available, that's when you start to impact on fruit size and quality. So again, this system, you can see the blue line here. The blue line is a measure of the coir moisture content, so it's the amount of water available in the substrate. And this is the blue line. This is the grower implementing a commercial control. This is the way they would normally irrigate their crops. And you can see here on various different times, there are big peaks and troughs in the water content within that substrate system. And of course, we know that that will have effects on plant physiology. So, and also, as I said, berry yields and berry quality. So, of course, what we're trying to do then is to do what we did in the experimental system, is to maintain the moisture content within the coir within a predetermined limit. Now, experimentally, we can maintain that to less than 1%, but on a commercial farm, we don't need to go to that level of accuracy. So anywhere between 5 and 6% is adequate. And you can see here, when we took control of the irrigation, we managed to maintain the moisture content within a fairly narrow range. Until then, we adjusted the set point to bring the moisture back up for another reason. You can see the effects of those treatments in the graph on your right. You can see the blue lines there, the blue bars. That's a measure of the soluble solids content, a measure of the bricks of the fruit. And the bricks is one of the quality parameters that the retailers use to assess the quality of the fruit. So a bricks above perhaps 7 or 8 is acceptable, and in some cases the higher bricks, the more sweeter tasting the fruit. So you can see the variable bricks values of the irrigation regime that was controlled by the grower, and you can see there's a consistent and significant increase in bricks in the fruit that were irrigated according to the grower test regime. And all of this information, of course, is available either on a web-based system or a smartphone app. And so we can start to give growers information about their irrigation, their crop status, the need for irrigation, how those plants are responding to different weather conditions, not quite in real time yet, but certainly far more frequent than perhaps they're used to. So using the system, we've shown we can deliver savings in water of up to 36%. We can deliver savings of fertilisers of up to 25-26%. We can increase Class 1 yields by anything up to 18% because there's a reduction in waste and a better berry quality. Those reductions in irrigation will equate to savings in energy used for pumping the water. And we've also shown that we can improve the flavour and the taste of these berries. And this has been carried out by some of the retailers' taste panels. So we're absolutely sure that this system will deliver lots of benefits. But of course, I was asked to talk about commercial risks and barriers to uptake. And despite all of those benefits, of course, there are risks. Because what we're actually asking the growers to do is to apply less water and fewer fertilisers, and by doing so, we'll improve yields, quality and shelf life. And that's often counterintuitive. And of course, these are high-value crops. This is the sort of amount of money per tonne of fresh produce, ranging from perhaps £3,000 per tonne of strawberries up to £6,500 per tonne of raspberries. So they're high-value crops, and of course, the growers know that if they don't schedule their irrigation effectively, if the substrate or the soil becomes too dry, they'll see that in terms of reduced fruit side, which will then translate to a loss in yield. Part of the problem is the current irrigation system design and performance. How reproducible is the irrigation system over a hectare block? And of course, it was mentioned earlier that often we don't have the data. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And that can be said to be the same in terms of an irrigation system on a hectare block. Often the growers don't necessarily know how the plants within that block are performing. If they're looking for an average yield of perhaps 25 hectares per block, 25 hectares, 25 tonnes per hectare, part of that block will be delivering 35 hectares and part of it will be delivering 15 hectares. So it's very important to be able to generate more information on how these inefficiencies are then impacting on yields and quality. And of course, again, there's a lack of information on how over-irrigation and over-fertigation affects quality in a commercial system. So part of our research, and again now I'll talk about projects that are funded by Innovate UK, part of our research is developing systems to help growers with these problems. I don't know if you can see the photo here. Hopefully you can see strawberry fruit, some red ones and perhaps some green ones, and there are sort of, they haven't come out very well, but there are squares around those fruit. And what this is, as was mentioned earlier, is a digital imaging system then that can be either driven along the rows, and that system will capture fruit at the green stage, fruit at the pink stage, and also fruit at the red stage. And so we can start then to provide information in terms of yield maps about the productivity of those plants in that area. This will also help growers to try to forecast when their berries are going to be ripe. It's a big challenge, given the vagaries of the weather, for a grower to predict how many tonnes of Class 1 fruit they're going to have by a week on Wednesday, for example. And this system will help them to identify that. I mentioned earlier that perhaps some of the irrigation systems aren't as uniform as perhaps they might be, and we know then if plants start to suffer a water deficit, if there's not enough water in the root system, the stomata in the leaves start to close, and then transpiration or cooling is lost, and those leaves begin to warm. And we can pick up response with the thermal imaging. So you can see here on the left, the blue is a well-watered plant, and you can see there on the right, the orangey red colour is a plant that's starting to suffer from water deficits. So again, we can use thermal imaging in those hectare blocks or whatever size system there is, in order to try to identify areas of that system where the plants are starting to suffer from any stress. We've also shown that we can use this system to detect the very early stages of powdery mildew infection. I think often a grower would say, well, if you're applying less water, you're predisposing plants to infection by powdery mildew. Now, we've actually shown the reverse. We've actually shown that there's a slight improvement in tolerance to powdery mildew if you apply these deficit irrigation techniques. But again, we can use this system to detect infection by powdery mildew 2 days after inoculation. Visible symptoms only occur within 6 or 7 days, and so scientifically it's a very powerful tool to help identify those early stages. On the right there, we're interested in using hyperspectral imaging to help define non-destructively aspects of berry quality, so things like phenolic concentrations, colour, firmness, dry weight. We're using that system now to develop predictive models to help us to measure those things non-destructively. And this, on the bottom here, is a relationship between VPD, which is the evaporative demand, and the rate of change of soil drying. And this system was developed by our colleagues at Delta T. And you can see here on the right of the graph, you can see the red line and the black dots overlay quite nicely. And what that's showing is that there's a direct relationship between ET, evapotranspiration, and the rate of change of moisture in the coir. When we apply deficit irrigation, you can see that relationship is then uncoupled, and we can identify here that even though there's high evapotranspiration, the rate of change of moisture content in the coir is decreasing, and that's simply because the stomata in those plants have started to close and are helping to limit water loss. So we can use deviations in this relationship to identify remotely when plants within a given block are starting to experience stress. Now, of course, all of these systems need to be incorporated into a system that a grower can use. So we've talked about precision automated fertigation. The weather obviously has a key effect on rates of ripening and also quality. And again, we want to try to start to weatherproof horticulture. How can we predict what effects the weather is going to have in terms of rates of ripening and fruit quality? And how can we use that information then to help forecast when the first pick will be, and when the peak picking will be, and help the grower to sort of make improved or increased accuracy of his on-farm decisions in those areas. And I've mentioned the multi-detector imaging systems in order to manage risks. So you can see there, this is called Pom Vision, a photograph in the middle. That's mounted on a quad bike. There are 2 or 3 cameras. And what that system will do then is drive along or be driven along an orchard, and the system will count the number of apples. So it'll help the grower to improve the accuracy of their yield forecasts. As I mentioned perhaps earlier on, all of this needs to be integrated into a grower-facing decision support system. So we're using on-farm resources, hardware that's already installed in the farms to integrate all this information and then present it to a grower in a way that's informative and easy to interpret. So what these tools then do is they give us a means to try to go the next step further, and by that I mean trying to impose beneficial stressors. We know that if you limit the amount of water we apply to one half of the root system, we can control the leaf area of the crop, we control the crop canopy. And with the announcement of the National Living Wage in years to come, this will have a big impact on many fruit growers. A lot of their expenses is associated with labour and the cost of picking fruit. So if we can reduce the leaf canopy without affecting yields, we can then start to make those fruit more visible. And so that may well increase the speed of picking and help with the labour costs. We've also shown that we can improve various aspects of berry quality by applying these sorts of techniques, such as firmness, antioxidant potential, and extend shelf life. And again, increasingly, especially in top fruit, the dry matter content of the fruit, in apples and pears and so on, is a key influence on the sort of the flavour perception and the quality of the eating experience by the consumer. So again, we can use, by reducing the amount of resources spent in maintaining the canopy and directing those resources more towards fruit production, we can start to improve aspects of fruit quality. And finally, we're interested in stress preconditioning. So how can we improve resilience of the crop to abiotic stresses perhaps later in the growing season? And our research and other research has shown that if you pre-stress a plant, it then becomes more resilient to repeated stress episodes, or indeed perhaps stresses of a completely different nature. So we're very interested in understanding the mechanism by how plants adapt to stress by this so-called stress preconditioning. So of course these hopefully are some of the outputs from our research. It's not just about precision irrigation and saving water and fertilisers. We've shown that we can increase yields, we can improve quality, we can reduce waste, and the idea of course is to develop guidelines to help growers implement these techniques on farm. The whole aim of this work is really to devise a system that can be rolled out commercially to try to help soft fruit growers and tree fruit growers to improve their production efficiency, but also then to use water and fertiliser and energy and other resources perhaps more wisely than is possible at the moment. And of course all of this work involves a lot of collaboration with growers and with industry and with partners such as Delta T and the Technology Research Centre, Innovate UK, BBSRC, lots and lots of funding available for this sort of work. And so these are some of just a list of our collaborators at the moment who are helping us deliver the slides I've just talked to you about just now. And I'd like to end there, and I'd welcome any questions.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. And as Mark said, we've got time for a couple of quick questions. Have we got any? Yes, good.
Stephen Branch. Many of the outcomes could also be attributed to strain selection, and East Malling is well known for the excellent quality of the different strains of raspberries, for example. Have you reached a limit with strain selection, and this is kind of pushing the yields up, or are you working hand in hand with the geneticists and others to get a good strategy for irrigation that also goes with a good strain of raspberry?
Yes, that's right. So at East Malling we have a genetics and crop improvement programme, and again, you know, they continue and work into developing and improving new varieties, and the two programmes work very much hand in hand with cross-programme projects. So a lot of colleagues in the genetics and crop improvement programme are also involved in some of the projects I've talked about today. So yes, we're trying to develop perhaps medium and longer term strategies to help to improve resource use efficiency and aspects of crop quality. So yes, we're working together closely with our colleagues to achieve that.
Thank you. Is there any further questions? No, Mark, thank you very much indeed for that very interesting presentation. Thank you.